Good evening, everyone. Tonight is June 7th, 2023. It is 6:05 p.m., and I would like to call to order the Joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting. Our first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would someone like to make a motion to approve the meeting agenda for tonight?
This is Lynn. I'll make the motion to approve the meeting agenda for June 7th, 2023.
And is there a second?
This is Janet, second.
Are there any questions or discussions or corrections? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote, and I'll start with Lynn.
Lynn, aye.
Janet, I.
Barb, aye. Bethany, aye.
And Jesse, aye. Oops.
Sue, aye.
And Sue, aye. How quickly they forget, huh? Okay, the next thing is a motion to approve the April 19th, 2023 City Council and Planning Commission meeting minutes. Is there a motion to approve?
This is Janet. I move to approve the April 19th, 2023 Joint City Council and Planning Commission meeting minutes with some small submitted edits, kind of administrative edits that I made.
All right, is there a second?
This is Barb. I'll second that.
It's moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion or questions? If not, I'll call for the vote.
Lynn, aye.
Janet, I.
Barb, aye. Bethany, aye.
Sue, aye.
And Jesse, aye. Our next point of business is a public open forum. Is there any, there's no one in the room besides the councils. Is there anyone online who would like to speak at the public open forum? Hearing none, we'll move on to number 6, City Council and Planning Commission discussion, Ordinance 2302, Commercial Design Standards, and that's pages 1 through 14 in our packet. So if everyone would dig that out. Dean, I'll let you walk us through.
Thank you. I will be as brief as possible. I think you have an opportunity prior to the meeting to go through. I outlined all of the changes in my cover memo. This is the section of the ordinance that's totally impacted by the changes we've talked about, which is the only reason it's 12 pages long. If you isolate the things we debated, they're just repeated 5 times. So I'm going to walk through very quickly. Nothing to do with design standards. This, in section 1 of the ordinance, talks about administrator duties, and this was the section that gives the zoning administrator the opportunity to approve modifications that are consistent with the spirit of the ordinance. I think that language is familiar to you. On the top of the next page, we start getting into actual design standards. I did insert the term when we are describing masonry products, masonry stucco, just to make sure it's distinguished, because there are some other forms of stucco. And then you see these yellow highlights. We did not have any debate or discussion about lap siding. And I would say in a lot of communities that get into discussions about design standards within strictly commercial districts, there's not a lot of lap siding. I think one of the examples that Frank may have pulled out earlier, originally from City of Bloomington, they had 4 tiers, if you remember, preference 1, 2, 3, and lap siding was in the bottom. I only highlight it because we didn't talk about it. And in this particular section, which is mixed use, I would want to leave it in because it's very common in apartment projects. The Apollo Apartments probably had 20 to 40% was lap siding, and then they had panels, and then they had some masonry. So we can come back to that as one of the items that we talked about. The biggest issue that we all agreed on was the addition, standing seam ribbed or corrugated metal panels are not permitted. And one of the unresolved items at the very last meeting regarded, do we have this descending scale of percentages, or just conceptually, right off the top of my head, you say, the minute you eliminate the standing seam or the ribbed or corrugated, did that really address why we were doing things, or was there a different reason? And so if the remaining combinations of materials still include perhaps lap siding, and then you've got metal panels, you've got a variety of things, but you're not going to have any of that standing seam anymore. You're not going to have pole barns anywhere in the district. Does that address this, and does it simplify it for you that in each of these districts, except light industry, you use 50%? 50%, as an example, for those of you that were involved in the review of Hy-Vee, was 50% masonry and 50% other. I don't believe they had any lap siding. It was metal panels and combinations
Yeah,
of things.
bamboo, glass.
Yeah, it was-
ceramic. It was a laundry list.
Might have had some tile.
Yeah.
And so that stands as a question. We can come back to it. The next section, instead of prescribing what colors we want, we just simply said, colors shall be soft or neutral colors, period. Brilliant colors, neon colors, and other distracting colors shall be prohibited. I did think that the last two sentences of the original language in the ordinance was duplicative. It was confusing. I just eliminated it. And we just say multiple color schemes are permitted provided they are complementary and compatible. I don't know what else to say. So we can come back to that if you have questions. Then, and pretty much the rest of the ordinance except the very end, all of these provisions will be identical in the next remaining commercial districts. But this item G on the top of page 3 of 12, the minimum square footage of any building shall be at least 7% of the property acreage net of wetland, stormwater ponds, and other easement encumbrances. The other term that we could use is, quote, buildable. I tried to just spell it out what it really meant. And then in my cover letter, I don't remember what it was, but, okay, item 6 in my memo, I looked at a variety of things and tried to figure out what the standard ought to be. And a percentage which floats with the size of the property is clearly, in my mind, the way to go. So to give you an example, that's 7%. And I started lower and I went higher and I ended up at 7. For comparison, Caribou Coffee was about 33,500 square feet. That's gross. They had easements, but they had no wetlands or ponds on that property. So I didn't net those out, but to give you an idea, 7% would have required a 2,350 square foot building, not the 670 square feet we got. If that addresses the concern you have, then I think this standard is fair. It's not overwhelming. Somebody like Caribou introducing a new concept might say, we're not going to build a building 4 times as big as we want. They might have moved on. But I think you got to start with something, and this appears good to me. The other comparison I did, the recently approved Brown Beagle development, or what is it called, Columbus Industrial Park, is about 15% building coverage on that property. Very high percentage. They had a lot of wetland on the property on the west end, and they had another wetland on the south. But if you factor in, and I did a rough calculation, it's about 15% of their gross, but it's 25% of the net acreage that project ended up with. So that's on the high end versus the 7, which again, I think we were looking for a minimum standard, not coming up with an average. If you can picture or remember anything about either Viking or EcoFun, they're very high net developable properties. Once you take stormwater and wetlands off of the site. Another, which is still in phase 1, is, I always want to call it Home Depot, Bear Home. if they take their second phase, they're going to be at about 20% of net in those properties. I didn't do a calculation for Blaine Brothers. I'm guessing it'll be in that 10% range. They have a lot of parking compared to some of the other businesses. So this is a standard that is arbitrary. I think it's fair and is representative of some of the things, and based on the examples we have, we'll come back and talk about that. So if we look at the remaining commercial districts, it's the identical language. And then the only additional things that included some housekeeping provisions, we talked about these, you didn't want corrugated metal or plastic fencing. And that's a general provision. As I looked through the rest of the ordinance, I added section K, because that's where we get into screening for residential properties, and I added that. We didn't really talk about it at previous meetings, but if you're gonna do it in one section, we should be doing it in this. So that's on page 11 of 12 in here. It's just the same language, but a different type of screening or purpose. The last one is the lighting provisions, and there, I was not involved in any of these discussions, but apparently there was direction originally to go a 1/2 foot candle on residential properties and retain the 1 foot candle illumination intensity on commercial properties. So that simply describes that. And then we added one provision, and this came about with Caribou Coffee again, where they had, if you can picture, like garage lights on the outside of their building, and I think it was Chris King that said, that's not consistent with the ordinance language. And so we've added this provision that sconces or other things with 100 watt or less incandescent. So if you figure the old-fashioned 100-watt bulb, that's pretty bright on a porch, but that would be the maximum intensity. And I can tell you, just with a setback, you come nowhere near having 1 candle foot at a property line. So I don't think there's anything in conflict. So with that, I've highlighted a couple items you want to debate, the yellow sections, and then percentage of masonry. I'll turn it back to the two chairs.
All right. Who has opinions?
Oh, I do.
What? I don't believe it.
I know, it's hard to believe, but I do. Okay, so the first thing is, I just read these minutes, so they're fresh in my mind. And on page 17 of 20 from our 419, Rob mentioned regarding metal panels that ribbed or corrugated should be eliminated, but standing seam should be allowed. He mentioned that they will use that on wall panels, and that can be an attractive look. So do we want to take out standing seam?
I was at that meeting, and I'm not certain where Rob's reference is from, and I can't equate a product that he would call standing seam that does not look like rib steel. So if you go on the internet, if you go to construction libraries, there's a variety of sources where you get terms and terminology. Ribbed, standing seam, it's what you see in every pole building is honestly across the board referred to as standing seam.
I think where he was, well, there was one other thing. He was supposed to send pictures. Did he do that?
I don't think I got pictures unless Frank did.
No.
Okay. I think where he was coming from was that if they use the standing seam, they oftentimes will use that to attach a facade to it that looks really nice, whereas evidently they don't do that on the other ones. I mean, I was just getting that from rewriting, but I'm only bringing it up because he made that comment and he's not here to clarify it. So I don't know what you want to do with that, because that certainly isn't my area of expertise.
I would add one other thing, my own personal experience after he mentioned it. And I have a daughter that lives in Columbia Heights, and there's 2-3 ways I can get there from Minnetonka. And I'm seeing a lot of the metro area. I don't see any commercial buildings anywhere that have what I call standing seam. And when you look it up on the internet, that's what it's called.
Okay. Well,
Whether it's wall material or a roof, I'm not sure what Rob honestly was getting at, other than he may have been describing a different product, but he's not here to defend it, as you say.
Yep, okay, so then the other question, or the other comment that I have has to do with the percentage of usable area. So I'm wondering whether or not we want to just call out that for lots equal to, or that percentage would be for lots equal to or larger than 1 acre. Because the reason I say that is because when we talked about like the Taco Bell drive-through only and stuff, if they stick that on a, 3/4 acre lot, it's not gonna look too small. And I just wonder whether or not that still achieves our goal of having, highest and best use of our land without eliminated options that might fit on a smaller parcel of land. So the 7% would be for those lots that were equal to or larger than an acre, and under that, maybe you just, do it as a percentage of the acreage, or I don't know. I mean, and the reason I say this, because I think Caribou looks fine where it's at, and especially when that gets built up, that's gonna look good. And if we someday get a Taco Bell drive-through, somewhere in here we had minutes that referenced about what square footage that was, and that wouldn't meet the 7%. So I don't wanna eliminate options.
I would say, based on the drive-through Taco Bell in my neighborhood, it's under an acre that it sits on. There is no parking, and so I think you can fit a 7% building on that. But all of our commercial and industrial districts are eligible to use the planned unit development provision, which is a legal way that can meet your own test for variation rather than a variance, which, to me, I'll say it again publicly, you had no business giving a variance to Caribou on a design issue. They met none of the criteria. But you all wanted it, and that's fine. I prefer to go PUD. You don't have to defend it. And so somebody comes in, and let's say the argument from Caribou is, we wanted to have some outdoor seating. We want that parking, and their site is totally full. They don't leave anything open. And you say, well, in that case, they can't meet the 7%. You can grant that approval when you see that review. So is part of your concern that it apply only to a bigger site so that the threshold is different because people might need more flexibility, or is it?
It's because we have limited land here, so I think, the original discussion we had was that we don't want small buildings on big lots. And is there a way to put in a standard, a certain percentage of lot size that has to be taken up by the building, which you've gotten to. But then we moved on to this other conversation about these drive-through onlys, and that they don't have indoor seating, so they're small. And my guess is that they're either going to buy a large lot and put in a couple of them, or they're going to buy a small lot, carve off a small lot like Caribou did. And then I think, by having the 7%, it eliminates them. I didn't think you could give a variance for something like this. I thought you could only give a variance for things like design standards. And this isn't really a design standard. So all I'm saying is that, I wouldn't be opposed to having calling out that 7% is for lots bigger than an acre.
Yep.
Bigger or equal to an acre. And whether or not you want to define it for smaller or just leave it undefined for small, you could say that they have to go to the PUD and then you negotiate it, because who knows what you'll get. But that was my comment.
Yeah, and I'll make a comment that doesn't answer your question. I got a call after Caribou was approved by the party who was actually going to own and lease back the business. And he asked me about future use. And I said, you're to the max. Between your driveways, your building, the drive-through, you can't put anything else bigger on there.
Right.
So from a practical standpoint, even though I think we allow a half acre in the commercial districts, it isn't going to happen by the time you have conventional setbacks and things of that nature. So using an acre threshold, I don't have a problem with. I still think you're going to find somebody, and it may be one of these drive-through type businesses, that aren't going to meet that percentage, and you'd have to consider waiving it for the right reasons and say they've maxed out the site, and it's 6%. And you'd probably say, fine.
Well, and I think with Caribou, part of their design was that they were going to have the double drive-through lane so that people, knowing that 90% or more of their customers are going to be coming from the freeway and they're going to want to get through there fast. So they put in, they need more land because they did the double drive-through lanes. And then the stacking so that they didn't, spill out onto Hornsby. So it's just a suggestion. I just think that gets us to where we're still saying if you're not going to put a little small fish house on a 40-acre lot, which we do have something like that in our city, but not eliminating the smaller footprint buildings that we might welcome in certain areas.
What do you think, Dean?
Easy to change.
Yeah.
Anybody else have an opinion? Elizabeth?
Caribou Coffee is on 3/4 of an acre. And if you multiply it, it comes out to approximately a 2,000 square foot building.
Yeah, and there's 670 square foot
So,
building.
yeah, 700 square feet. So, but they knew that. They bought the minimum they bought the minimum property to fit what they wanted, double lanes, they bought the minimum amount. They didn't want to buy any more.
But what I'm saying is if you leave this the way that Dean is proposing, that we'd have to say no to them because they didn't meet that 7%.
And that's where the PUD would come in. So I think that's where you could have negotiated and said, okay, so you want, less than 7%? Well, maybe you put an outdoor seating area, or maybe you do something else to make it, a little bit more, or, do you know what I mean? Some other things that maybe you would have liked, it would have been nice to have an outdoor seating area that had maybe a little, I won't say gazebo, but you've seen them where you dine outside, but you're not in the middle of the sun.
Like a pergola on there.
A pergola and that.
But
kind
you
of thing.
still can do that, right? I mean, you can still say you should have a PUD because we want this, this, and this. I just, I didn't want somebody to, Bill has said that before where, site selectors are going through and looking at people's ordinances and before they even give you a call, they look and go, oh, we won't fit there, so forget that.
Anybody else?
Well, so I wasn't here during the Caribou, but I think if we would have required more and the cabin didn't fit, maybe we would have got the chalet.
No, we wouldn't have.
Oh.
No way.
Okay. But I just think that the lesson was learned with Caribou, and what we didn't like about it. So here is the option to,
I think what we didn't like about it was that they changed course on us from the time they sort of met and proposed the project to the time they put the application in. And then they also agreed to our building standards, but when they came to the public hearing, they had a whole different design that they wanted us to. And to be honest, I think everyone got confused by that, and so we didn't know what to do. So there was a couple of different things, but that aside, I'm still happy they're here.
Yeah, me
I
too.
still think it's a good fit for that little area, and it's using 3/4 of an acre appropriately, and lots of people go there, so.
I'm just saying, if there's something that you feel like we should have a little bit more control of, then this is the time to make that.
Well, I like the idea of the PUD, but correct me if I'm wrong, you can still require that even if we make this sort of two-tiered.
We can't require a PUD,
Well-
they can choose that option, but we can't require them.
I didn't mean, you can still offer that. So
Oh, yeah.
if they propose something we aren't wild about in a design, we can still say, well, you could do a PUD and then we can negotiate that. So by having this two-tiered system, you're not eliminating that option.
I like options.
Yeah.
So if we're doing
something to define, keeping the options as open as possible in a way that's still obviously defined and outlawing the things that we know we don't want. So I guess I'd say I'm cool with that, with like the acre. Because the spirit of what we're trying to get at is these small buildings on huge lots. It's just my thought.
So Elizabeth, does the addition from Janet fly with you, all right?
I think it will work. Either way will work, but I don't think it's a bad thing to have a variety of things. What I think the major problem is someone coming in and saying they want to put a 10,000 square foot building on a 40-acre lot. I mean, it was just, okay, that's just not the right way to go. It's just not a good use of the freeway district. It was never the intent when we installed the utilities. I mean, it just went against everything we wanted. But again, when you get to the smaller lots, my understanding is McDonald's can be put on a quarter of an acre. That's probably only a one-lane drive-through, or maybe that's a traditional one, but, so the smaller lots are utilized to the max usually.
If you want to go ahead with this, I would suggest adding at the very beginning on properties greater than or equal to 1 acre, and then add the rest. And then I would put, after the first building, S in parentheses after. So it'll say any building or buildings. Because there could be multiple buildings, not just a building. And that would apply to this.
Yeah.
So if that's okay, then that change is done.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we'll just leave the standing seam since we don't really know what Rob was talking about, and he's not here to clarify it.
Well, should we leave them or should we take those out?
Which?
Standing seams.
I think he's got it as that it's not permitted.
I think it's gonna look too much like pole barn myself, and I'm not for that. I don't like that.
People use standing seam on roofs, they use it on walls. They all look the same. That's the standard terminology in the industry. Rib steel we added and corrugated, so there was no mistake.
Yeah.
We want flat metal panels. And so I can't change it now, but at a point in time after the public hearing and it comes back to the council, let Rob take another shot at defending.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, each of you can go on the internet and just Google rib steel and it'll show you your pole barn.
Yeah, I'm good with what you're suggesting. I just was bringing it up because
Yep.
I remembered
No,
reading it in
I
the.
think he'll appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah.
And I think the public hearing is a great place for Rob to
Sure.
present it.
All right. Ready for motion?
Sure. Is that the one we have right here in front of us?
Yep.
Okay,
with
with my
your
change, yep. So I would move to approve the commercial design standards proposed ordinance with the changes we discussed, and call for a public hearing on July 19th, 2023 at 6 PM with a publication date of July 6th, 2023.
And do we have a second?
This is Lynn, I'll second.
It's moved and seconded. Any more questions or discussion? Barb?
I have a question.
Oh,
Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Sue.
I should raise my hand. And mine is not about the content, but just one of the words is deleted out, and I'm not sure if it should be, and it's in the very first paragraph on page 3 or page 1 of the ordinance. The first paragraph where it says, city code are amended as illustrated with omitted provisions shown as deletions, and deletions is crossed out.
I think it's just meant to show that the deletions will be crossed out, right?
Like an illustration, right?
Yeah, Sue, if I could, this is not an actual ordinance component rather than an introduction to how we are structuring the changes. And we often use the strike through an underlying provision to avoid having even more pages than need be. So this is an illustration of what's to follow. And so the deletions are indeed stricken through as it's shown in red, and the new stuff is underlined in red.
Okay, gotcha.
Does that clarify it? And then,
Yes.
you know, we also added, which wasn't in any of our previous ordinances, but sometimes when I first saw one of the attorneys, I thought, what are these three asterisks? So I added a provision there, what they mean. It's that you're skipping a section in the ordinance rather than, I mean, if we went through honestly from section 7A 501 through 800, we'd have 90 pages of an ordinance. You just wouldn't want to see that. So that first paragraph is really illustrative for descriptive purposes only.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that.
great.
That was my only question.
What was the motion with the corrections
Yep.
to send this to a public hearing?
Yep,
Okay.
with the changes.
We got a
with
little
public-
reverb in here and I'm having a hard time hearing.
Public hearing on July 19th and publication on July 6th. Well, that can't be.
No, we don't have a meeting on July 6th.
You've got it backwards,
Okay,
right?
so
So is the public hearing on the 6th and the publication on the 19th?
we don't have a meeting on the 6th. Is it supposed to be, because the,
I'm just reading what's in front of me.
yeah, because the public hearing is on July 19th and it's published July 6th in the paper, is that?
You can publish it, but so is the hearing July 19th? When's the hearing date?
July 19th.
Okay. And the publication date's then July 6th? Is that what you're?
Wasn't the publication date the publication of the ordinance? It doesn't have to be after the public hearing?
The public hearing requires a notice, so we have to put it in the paper. So there's a publication date.
Oh.
And then a public hearing date.
I thought, I was thinking the publication date was when we published the new ordinance after it's approved.
It is, you have to do it.
Effective date.
Yeah, it's
Right.
effective date, and so we have to do it.
But. the-
2 times.
But, so the publication date here is before the public hearing.
But that's the notice of the public
Yeah.
hearing.
Yeah, that's the, so,
So it's the notice publication date,
yep,
not the
public-
ordinance publication date.
Correct.
I'm sorry, I thought it was the ordinance publication date.
All right. Barb, anything from you? You're quiet. No.
I don't have one to what it says, that's why I'm not reading what they're reading.
So we have a motion on the floor. It's been moved and seconded. Any other discussion from anybody?
How bright is a foot candle?
Huh?
How bright is a foot candle?
It's as,
I mean, I know technically it's like, if it's something's a foot away from a candle, theoretically, right? But like,
all I know is you have a little meter and you stand at the lot line and you point it towards the light, and if it's less than a foot, you're good. I don't know what it actually looks like.
I'm just so curious what it looks like. There are so many bright residential lights around where I'm like, why? Why is this necessary?
There's two things. It is the view of
Published.
the bulb itself, and there is the intensity of the illumination at a property line.
Right.
And so your neighbor's got a spotlight aimed right at your house. You come out, it blinds you. When you take that reading on the property line, they don't see that intensity of the light itself,
Right.
only the illumination. And a foot candle, I'm going to just say, I don't remember anymore. At one time, you described it in nits, N-I-T-S. Frank, do you remember? We looked it up. We talked about it. So you can do it also in the intensity of wattages. The problem is you go from incandescent 100 watts, that's equal to an LED 17 watts. So wattage doesn't work anymore. Let's put it this way, a half-foot candle at the property line is dim. The other problem of seeing the light is by having to shroud them. And we don't require the shrouding on residential property, only commercial. So you can have a yard light, you can have spotlights. A lot of people do have security lights. I had a neighbor on 24/7, never turned them off.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, our whole street. And I think it's because there was somebody on our street that used to like steal from people. And so everyone on our street put these like massively bright lights up, and it's just obnoxious. So I was curious. I'm like, how bright is a half a foot candle? And
You can borrow the light meter and go check.
I might.
I did that once.
I might. Well, yeah, I mean, one of our neighbor's lights in the winter, it shines across our whole, like all the way to the other. It lights up the back of our pond, but I'm like, I don't know if it just feels like it's bright because it's winter and it's snow and it's, whatever. Anyway, so I was just curious. That's something I have opinions on.
Borrow the light meter.
Yeah, I
Then
will.
you'll know.
All right, I'll call for the vote.
Lynn, I.
Janet, I.
Barb, nay.
Bethany, I.
Sue, I.
And Jesse, aye. All right. On to number 7, truck line landscape plan review, pages 1 through 4 of our enclosure.
All right. Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started on this. I'll just briefly kind of introduce the subject. So on December 28th, the City Council approved the Truck-A-Line conditional use permit for planned unit development. At that meeting, the landscape plan that was submitted, which you can find as part of your enclosure E1 and E2, was reviewed by the City Council. The City Council had requested that a new landscape plan would be submitted with more conifers on the Hornsby side of the street. The approval was conditioned on the landscaping plan as approved by city staff. During the process of reviewing the civil plan, the city requested that some trees would be removed from the easement area for utilities. The 20-foot easement area resulted in a more limited amount of space for the trees to be planted. You can see this new plan as E3 and E4 of the enclosure that has a revision date on what would be your right-hand side or bottom of 5/26/2023. This is the result, I think, of our subdivision ordinance for new subdivisions. And keep this in mind for the future, or that part in the mind for the future, as we may be revisiting that part of the ordinance. But to get the meat of tonight, as a result, Truck-A-Line does not have the room to do everything that they want to do. And the result is fewer trees on the Hornsby side. So after reviewing the plan and taking into account the circumstances regarding the easement, city staff believes that this is the best plan. However, we wanted to get input from the Planning Commission and City Council for approving a landscape plan, ensuring this was still in the spirit of what the City Council's intention was.
I'm going to add a little bit more information so you can, in your mind, picture. So in every subdivision, we have on the street side, which is a public right-of-way side, we have a 20-foot drainage and utility easement. This is beyond the property line, so it's into the property, and it's where basically utilities go, and it's for drainage purposes. We've allowed in the past landscaping in that drainage and utility easement because, again, it's 20 feet into the line, and in this case, in this district, the setback is 30 feet to a building, and then they can have the parking area. So it's a very small area, especially if you want to expand your parking or make the most of your parking, which most of these vendors do. But in addition, Kevin had asked whether or not Lane Brothers and/or Truck-A-Line, were they going to use the stubs that were placed in the Hornsby Street right-of-way? And they said no. And so what he wanted to do was he wanted to put a fire hydrant there because that would make sense because it's already stubbed in. Well, that's exactly where the monument sign is.
That's where the what is?
The monument sign. So if you see the curvature, that's where the monument sign was. And of course, it's a drainage and utility easement. That's where we're supposed to put the fire hydrants. So right there was a conflict, and we indicated that we requested a fire hydrant there, and that's what we wanted to see there. So again, when we're looking at on a front yard, and again, when they're looking at so much landscaping in a very short span of space, it becomes very conflictive, because you generally don't want big tree roots in your water system and or sewer system with your pipe. I mean, you know what I mean? So it's different if you're going to put grass and you're going to put bushes in, but when you start putting trees in, you have, roots, and then you want to dig because you have a problem with your utilities, it becomes a problem. The other issue that happened, if you look on 150th, which is the new road that they are building, you can see the overstory is hanging into our right-of-way. And I will tell you, that's a big deal for Jim, because anytime it starts hanging in the right-of-way, it's the sight line, it becomes issues for them when they're trying to do ditch maintenance, because you have the overstory of the tree, then you have tree branches that come down. And so he has always asked that the overstory stay on the property, stay on the property at which it's being planted on. So we asked them to move the trees and or make the trees smaller. In other words, these trees that they have here are very large trees. They're very tall and very big shade trees. So at the meeting, we said, can you do some decorative, smaller stature trees? And then we got some pushback, and they said, well, maybe we can do arborvitaes or something of that effect. I think we pushed back again and said, no, really, trees is what we wanted there. So again, I think from a practical standpoint, you had what looks good, what's going to screen, but in practicality, what can you put in the space and not conflict with the intent of the roadway, the drainage utility easement, and the space they provided. So we quickly realized after others were looking at it that there were some issues with the landscape plan. So that's the background. So we had a meeting, an in-person meeting, and they understood the issues we were presenting, and then they indicated to us that they would amend the plan. And that's what Frank presented to you earlier. I just wanted to give you some background of where all these conflicts came from during the discussion.
So are they not going to have a monument sign?
No, they're removing it.
So no sign anywhere?
There'll be a wall sign on the building, and then there'll be a, on the front of the building, there'll be a wall sign, and I think they're going to have some directional signage, but they felt that it wasn't necessary to have a monument sign there.
Elizabeth, could I ask a question?
Sure.
I noticed that they're putting white oak trees there, and I think you'll recall when CST, when we did that business, that the Anoka County is high for oak wilt. So I'm wondering why they would do that with such large trees. All of the oak trees are vulnerable to oak wilt. So, I mean, maybe they should change those. You don't want to have to end up with 11 dead trees.
I agree. Those were very tall trees. You know what I mean? Tall trees. I'm not sure whether that was on the southerly, on 150th, or whether that was on Hornsby Street. I don't remember. I don't remember the names of the trees. But I agree with you. What I indicated to them was you want to plant trees that are going to survive, and also growth-wise that they're going to fit the area that you're putting it in. So there was a conflict here, because I know that from their perspective, they want it to look good, and they want it to look like a landscape plan, and they wanted to make sure that they can maintain it. And so they are unable to put a berm in 20 feet. So the berm is gone, the monument sign is gone, and they want to be able to maintain it. Well, if we're going to do screening, then that's the only way to do screening is to augment, some of the larger, conifers or whatever you want to put in. But I know that's where the council wanted to go, was more of screening. But again, they only have 20 feet. So unless we, then they were like, well, we don't really want to put a row of arborvitaes because we don't think that'll look good. And I don't think that would look good either.
Plus the deer will chew them down to nothing.
Yeah, so this is where we, you know, sat around at the table on a Friday, trying to figure out what should go here, and so again, I know we had some discretion, but Dean had indicated, you know, maybe we should bring it back to the planning commission and understand what's going on here. We're trying to put water and sewer lines in, we're trying to do some things in here for practicality for sewer, for public utilities. The council's trying to screen, and they're trying to do a landscape plan to make it look good. And now we're trying to come up with a plan to make all that work in 20 feet.
But Elizabeth, when we talked about this with them at that meeting, I agree. You have the discretion to review and offer suggestions. So maybe going back to Barb's thing, next time you talk to them, say, what about the white oaks? Is it a resistant strain or anything else, or find something different that's not going to be full of white oak, whatever white oak has, oak wilt, in 5 years or so. And
Yeah,
I
and
think,
it kills them. It doesn't, you know, it's a deadly fungal infection. It kills them. So,
I've got a whole woods full of firewood right now from that. So talk to who's ever in charge or their arborist and say, what's the story? Why would they choose that? They could choose something else. Put an autumn blaze maple if that's necessary. Those are pretty and they look good. But I also agree to keep it out of our right of way so that 10 years from now, it's not a problem with the roots choking off the sewer system or whatever it is. So I have no problem, and I have no problem with their amended sign or with their amended plan. And also, if you're coming down the freeway and you've got your GPS on and you're heading to truck line, whether they have a sign on Hornsby Street or not, once they see the building and they see the name on it, they'll know where they are. So I think I'm in favor of the new plan. And again, at that meeting, they reassured us over and over, they want it as good as possible. And so I'm in support of the whole deal.
Can I play a devil's advocate? Maybe act like a planning commissioner or a city council member?
Not you, what?
At the risk of alienating everything that Elizabeth and the rest of the staff do, especially last minute. I was up in Ely opening the cabinet and trying to email back and forth. First and foremost, I think utilizing an existing water stub that's in the street is great. But the conflict was, if you look at the original plan that you approved, the monument is maybe 5 feet in from the property line. It's clearly within the easement. But I asked Kevin, and I never got an answer, why can't you dead end aren't hydrants usually 5 feet off of the road, not 20 feet into the property? So I didn't see that as a conflict. As I mentioned in an email to both Kevin and Elizabeth, in almost all the cities that I work with, there's no prohibition. It is you plant as a homeowner or business at your risk within any easement. You are prohibited from being in the right of way. Nothing in the original plan you approved is in the right of way. Nothing. These trees along 150th Street in particular probably have a 13-foot boulevard to the edge of the road. We're talking American lindens that are proposed there. You know, maybe in 100 years, you'd have something that would stick out in the right of way. I mean, this isn't Minneapolis with ground cover that you got to be worried for public works spending an inordinate amount of time. He's talking about trees that are growing up on your gravel roads that have been there 100 years, and they're encroaching in your right-of-way. The other objection, and we clarified this at a staff meeting, and I hate to announce we're going to have another ordinance, we require throughout the city a 20 feet drainage and utility easement along roads. In a rural area, that's fine. In the rural area, you got a 75-foot setback. In the urban area, I've never seen a city go over 10 feet. And so we're going to propose an ordinance that says in the freeway corridor, for heaven's sakes, we allow the parking to come 20 feet from the property line. And if you got a 20-foot easement, and then our position is you can't have any landscaping or signs in there, we're at cross purposes. So what I'd like to suggest is that we reduce that to 10 feet. And it is still, in my opinion, the landowner's risk to plant anything in there. They've got to go to 511 and get permission to plant a tree so they don't cut one of your power lines or phone line or whatever, but that is about as standard as any. And so what happened, we took kind of this curvilinear design that you liked and approved, and now you have a complete flat, straight, linear design. And I think part of this would be if our intention is to go back to the 10 feet, and I don't know what utilities may be in there, but you simply say, none of the city utilities are in that 20-foot easement. You gotta be conscious of whatever. Could you consider an encroachment in the easement? That, again, quote, is their risk. I did comment regarding a permanent thing like a monument. We, or all cities, grant a partial release of an easement that's in favor of the city if you're going to allow a structure like a ground sign. So that would be different than landscaping. I just got to continue this beef a little bit. If you go back to the, and I'll get to White Oak in a minute, Barb. If you go to the original plan, they've got 2 American lindens again, and 3 pine trees, and they've now, for the sake of what? Cutting branches, encroaching the street, and we go from 3 down to 2 pines on both sides? I don't understand what that is. Has nothing to do with city maintenance. They're not in public right-of-way. Yes, they need to go call 511 and make sure they're not planting them on the phone line. But why would we go from 5 trees on either side of that main entrance to 3? I just don't get it.
And we did not ask them to reduce it. We asked them to put smaller trees in.
And that, again, was so Public Works didn't have to cut them?
Prune them.
Well, wasn't there some issues of seeing as trucks are pulling in and out?
Well, they have big
Somebody
trucks.
brought
They
that
have big trucks coming out, you know what I mean, down the street. And again, when you have large overstory trees, they tend, you know what I mean, they tend to sometimes fall down, and you know what I mean, and you have problems with trees falling in the right of way. So anyway, we asked them to make sure the overstory was on their property. Because right now, it shows the overstory in the right of way.
No. In the original December plan, which has 2 lindens and 3 pine trees on each side, they're all on private property, every one of them. And so again, I'm not certain what the position of the city is.
The curb is into the right of way, but so is the overstory.
The property line is the black line,
Yep.
which is 13 feet from the city curb. So if I'm worried about sight distance, I'm talking about a 2.5-inch caliper linden, which is going to take 60 years to get 3 feet in diameter if they live that long. And when you look at the crown cover at however many feet, when they grow tall and they start hanging over the road, are we really worried about trimming? Versus what Jim might be experiencing right now in your rural area, where that encroachment has been here forever. We are talking new landscaping, totally out of the right-of-way.
And the trees in the rural area are all scrub trees.
I'm sorry?
They're all scrub trees.
Sure.
They're, the Chinese elm and all the other things that just sprout up. And yeah, they're probably in the way, but they're not like the planted landscape trees.
Let me throw a little different light on it. I'm sorry to oppose you, Dean.
Oh, I want to just finish one
go ahead.
comment. I still haven't heard anybody tell me why we went from 5 trees on either side of the main entrance off 150th to 3.
Yeah, that I'm not sure why they did. We
They're
never
not
said- we never-
closer.
We never said less trees.
They're not closer to the right of way. They didn't move them at all. They just went from 5 trees to 3. So again, I'm acting as a layperson here. I'm not being a staff person. I'm raising the questions.
Well, I'm glad you
Now-
did, because I was worried that this new one isn't going to screen adequately.
Right.
But here's,
That's my
here's,
concern.
here's my rebuttal.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
So I interrupted you, Mr. Mayor. Go ahead now.
What?
Put on your seatbelt.
Here we go.
Isn't this the right, this is the right-of-way line, this black one?
Yes, that's their property. So all the trees are inside their property.
Yep, but this is what we were talking about.
They were all 5 inside their property. They just went from 5 to 3.
Yep, okay, so I just wanted to make sure we were on the same page.
Yeah,
It's the overstory that goes into the right-of-way.
but you're talking about the overhang potential. And again, a 2.5-inch caliper tree is going to be planted 2 feet inside their property. It's another 15 feet to the curb. Are we talking about branches that are obstructing the view and Public Works is going to waste time trimming? Come on.
Well, none of us will be alive to see it
I-
by the time. that's-
Virtually every suburb, and your ordinance reads, you want deciduous trees planted at the boulevard. That means on private property, but at the street line. You know why? Because everybody wants streets that look like Minneapolis or St. Paul that are 100 years old, but none of us are going to be alive to see it. It's just, that's the starting point. So my beef is, I can understand from the conflict of the easement area that they shrunk up their planting bed. They can keep it all in the back 10 feet because we're going to eliminate that eventually. But I saw no merit on the change of the landscaping. And I'd like to go toe-to-toe with Jim about worrying about cutting 2.5-inch caliper trees that are 15 feet from the edge of the road.
When you do that, can I watch?
Yeah, but, you know, and I will tell you though, I mean, we had complaints, you know what I mean, on Humber Street that the trees were hitting the buses. I mean, so we have other areas that this is a problem, and I realize it's not a problem today, but it is a problem that we have, and the branches are out in the right of way, and you gotta go out and you cut them, and when you do cut them, they all get upset because you don't prune the tree, you cut the tree. And then the trees don't look good. So that was where he was, I think that's where he was going, because we've done it, we've gotten complaints, and the only place you start with the problem is when they plant them. Because by the time they plant them and they grow and you chop them off, they're not happy.
And again, devil's advocate, it is the difference between things that are growing in the existing city right-of-way versus agreeing on how we're going to beautify the community with new landscaping that isn't going to be visible for 60 years. It ain't going to hang over the road and we don't need to worry about trimming it. That's my point.
And then,
I'm happy to be in the same room with Jim because you're talking Hummer Street and I'll bet none of that landscaping was planted within the last 50 years.
you're probably right. Those
I'm
are all
sure.
older properties.
Well, and my question is, this is going to be all trucks and trailers and stuff, and I think it needs the more dense screening.
Put the pine trees back in that they had in
Yeah.
December. Amen.
Right.
Yep.
Because that's the whole purpose of screening, and that whole lot is going to be nothing but vehicles parked there. Is that what you want to see? I don't.
You're right, Barb, I agree with you. I like the original one better, too.
I want
So-
to know what Jesse has to say.
So you want to replace the 3 on each
He's
side
scared
of
now.
Go back to
150th Avenue?
What's
the
that?
original.
You want to
Go back to the
No, go back to the
original.
original. So
Because
go-
there's
Yeah.
only
There you
the
go.
four
Go back.
right? No,
four
this is the original.
deciduous
This
trees.
is the original.
Why would you take out all the evergreens, which are going to give you the best screening?
No, I think the question was, you wanted more conifers, and there isn't room for more, because we want them out of the first 10 feet. So they can't put, in your December 28th, you said, can you add more conifers? Then at this point, there isn't enough room for more conifers.
Right, but I'm just saying that of the 2 plans we have in front of us, I like the one that's got the monument sign on it, because that's going to screen better.
But the monument sign has gone away.
No, it doesn't have to, is what I heard.
They don't want it. We don't require it.
I heard Dean say that it went away because we told him we wanted to put a hydrant there, but we don't need to do that.
And also, why should they put a sign there they don't?
That was their
$50,000
idea,
sign.
not ours,
Okay, but they've agreed they don't want it.
because we told them we wanted a hydrant, and we don't need to have that
We need,
argument.
we need a hydrant. I mean,
know,
the
but-
the stub's there, that's where the hydrant, I mean, the generator, that's where the hydrant
So the
will
sign
go.
goes away and that's no issue.
But what I heard, what did you just say about the hydrant? I thought you said that,
He said he could pull it back and
Well,
hook up and
If,
whatever.
if you look on the drawing, either one, if the depiction of the edge of the road right-of-way, I don't know if that dark line is the center line, I presume it is, on Hornsby, you've got a 30 feet setback to the property line from the edge of the pavement. So there's 30 feet of public boulevard. How far from the edge of the road, if a fire truck is gonna come and hook up on a fire hydrant?
But that's where the water line is today. That's where the stub is today.
I get it, but that stub does not go under that monument.
Yeah, that's where it is.
The stub comes out to the edge of the right-of-way. What Kevin was talking about was on the right-of-way, putting the easement, or putting the hydrant. And so my question is, are you not putting all hydrants within access of the road itself? Or
Okay, hold it. My
or
point
does the
is,
fire truck pull off of the pavement, 30 feet of grass, where there's probably a ditch section on Hornsby? I mean, why would you put the hydrant way up there where the monument is? You put the hydrants right next to the edge of the pavement.
But that's not where the water line is.
Well, you make an extension from
So-
where the stub
But
is out
that's-
to the road.
All the fire hydrants are in the same spot on the water line. That's what, in the engineer's report, Kevin requests it in the engineer's report. He asked them if they were gonna use the stub, the existing stub in the road. They said no, and he said, I wanna put a fire hydrant on it then. So then we weren't moving any water lines, we weren't doing anything else, we were putting it, but then they put the monument sign, I think someone didn't talk to someone, and they put the monument sign there. They're not, I'm not sure where the monument sign came in, came out, whatever it is. We generally don't have structures in the drainage utility easement, permanent structures. So, I'm not sure why someone put it there. It's usually 5 feet from the property line, but outside of drainage utility easement. So, again, not knowing all the there, but I don't know that you would move a water line back into the street when all the other water lines are, the lines are existing. We're not putting water lines in here. They're existing in the street today.
And again, that was the least of my conflict, because apparently they don't want a monument anymore, and that's, you know,
And that's what they said.
maybe
that-
they save some money. But the concept of going from an undulating and staggered concept for landscaping, which you liked in December, can still largely be met. If you look at that December line, imagine a point between the curb, which is the end of the 20 feet easement, and then that dark line, which represents the property line. That entire space is the 20 feet drainage and utility easement. If you look at all of the centers of the landscaping going down there, almost all of them are at that 10 feet point. There's one or two encroachments. And I just wonder if the message could be, if staff level were at an agreement of, we're only gonna use 10 feet from now on, not 20 feet easements, because there's no room for landscaping. Could they not just modify that? Yes, take the monument out. When they take the monument out, they're probably gonna take the ground shrubs and that sort of thing. But at least you'd have a little more variety, and Frank, you counted the quantity. There are more pine trees in the December model, correct?
Yes, you can see that, I think, on pages E1 and E3. It has counts of them.
We just wanted the quick estimate from the expert here.
Yeah.
Yeah, say yes.
so how many are there? What's the difference? 10 trees or 50 trees or what?
So of the conifers, be. I knew I was gonna get your blood pressure. So Spruce is down from 16 to 8. The, the white spruce, the Colorado spruce is down 13 from 17. There's the same amount of silver firs.
So it's not a huge difference. Well, everyone knows I hate trees. Everyone knows that I hate trees.
And parks.
And if you look at the casino, every tree that we made them put in 15 years ago is too close, the branches are tangled in each other, and,
We had to
And-
prune those too.
huh?
We had to prune those too.
And it was a mistake.
Because the guy said when he was mowing the lawn, they were hitting him in the head.
Well, you know, if you
So-
plant trees, you got to prune them once in a while. Even I
Right.
know that.
Prune the lower limbs when they're young. You know, that was
All I'm saying is,
hindsight
you know
is
what I mean?
2020.
So
So yes,
could I attempt to summarize? I was being a little abrupt. I like to do that every now and then. If the message was to consider public works, and I think that's just something that needs to be debated very long-term, comparing Hummer Street to a brand-new development, and appreciate that example, but I think there's a night and day difference. So if you look
agree.
at whatever conversation was held about getting trees out of the right-of-way in the December model, which again shows 2 lindens and 3 pine trees, and then you go to the May plan, there's 2 lindens and 1 pine tree, and they're in the identical location, so they're not any closer or further from the city. I don't know what was accomplished by removing 4 pine trees. So question 1, why not restore those? And question 2, if the monument is gone and the conflict with the water hydrant is resolved by the removal of this, and we're saying we only need 10 feet, can we go back to the December plan for the rest of this? And if it is in that 10 feet, call 9 or 511 and make sure you're planting it there. Because I think you all recognize that that was a nicer layout than the substitute.
Right,
Okay.
definitely.
And now to Barb's question, we gutted forestry and our landscape provisions. We're no longer the experts. This is a registered landscape engineer. My comment is, it's okay for us to say, gee, is it safe to plant oaks again? But I wouldn't insult them. This is what they do for a living, and maybe white oak is exempt from the fungus. I
It
don't know.
isn't. I checked with the University of Minnesota.
They don't recommend it?
Nope.
Then I think that's a staff comment, that, the council was concerned.
I
Go
mean,
back
if it
to
dies, they have to replace it, so it's to their advantage that you call it out, and if they decide they want to
Well,
do
they're
it.
expensive trees. I mean,
it's
why
their
would you
money.
plant them in the
I
first
know.
place?
I'm just saying, I call it out, but if they decide they still want it,
Then it's their problem.
yeah.
That's
Okay.
all I said.
I think it's a
you
legitimate
do it?
comment, but I'd hate to see us go overboard in that recommendation. But again, if we could go back to the December plan and eliminate the little planting island and the monument, and again, the rest of the trees by the illustration are largely in the back 10 feet of that 20 feet easement. So if that's okay with the rest of you, that's kind of where I was coming from.
When you,
I'll mend fences with Elizabeth later.
we've talked about this 3 or 4 times already, so.
And Jim, he's probably watching on Zoom. I'm going to get killed.
When we talked about this, we just said to them, leave the number of trees, put, smaller stature trees that wouldn't have as big overstory. You could plant them in the same place. That's just what we said, because the trees that they had are very large trees. If you look them up, like Barb said, they're white oaks. I mean, these are big trees.
but slow growing.
And slow-growing big trees. So we said, well, why wouldn't you put more ornamental trees? That's what we asked for, same amount, smaller overstory, but more decorative trees. as far as the monument sign that was out, they were okay with that. And I agree with Dean, we have to amend the code and say you can't put it in the first 10 feet.
Elizabeth, you might suggest to them that red maples are very decorative and they don't get real tall, but they do fill out. So they act as a really,
So red maples instead of the white oaks?
I would say that.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure, both of these say December 23. I mean, both of these say December 28th, 2022. So the one we like is the one that has the monument sign, but we don't want the monument sign. Is that correct?
For whatever reason, this landscape architect does not like putting dates on landscape plan. He puts the
Okay,
same
I
dates
just
on
kept
it.
hearing December, and I'm like, they both say December. So I want to make sure that I'm looking at the right one.
Yeah, there's a revision date to the right on page E4 that's dated May 26, 2023. So that's the one, that's the newer one.
Number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to see, so,
Yeah, I don't see it, but that's all right. I'll take your word for it.
all right.
I don't see it. Where is it?
It's,
Right
it's to
here.
the right of the December. It says date revision number.
Way down here.
It's underneath the date,
There we go.
right? It says 5/2/23.
So Elizabeth, are you willing to go renegotiate with them?
Yeah,
It's administrative.
Yep.
We'll split the difference. Dean wants to build a new forest. I want all blacktop. And of course, somebody else is paying for it, so that's,
Thank you for letting me be commissioner for a day.
my
We have an
suggestion,
opening, Dean, if you'd like to just join us.
join the planning commission.
so I think my suggestion is that obviously the landscape architect is going to do the plan, and we obviously we all want it to look good. But my suggestion would be try to put the overstory trees and the conifers, you know what I mean, offset, and try to put landscape, either flowers or whatever bushes, whatever they're else putting in the 10 feet that's closest to the right of way. Do you know what I mean? To kind of keep the trees to the back of the easement rather than the front of the easement. I think most of our utilities are in the front 10 feet at this point.
Sue, do you have something? I
Oh.
can't see if you're waving your hand or what.
She's on mute.
No, I don't. I agree with what you're talking about.
All right. Okay, good. And just speak up if I don't see you. Put your little hand thing up. All right, so what do we do next? You just go back with them, Elizabeth, for another meeting and
Yep.
one more round. So what we're going to gain is probably 10 or 15 trees back to the original December 28th plan, correct?
It's back, it would be back to the December plan, replacing the white oaks with the red maple, or suggesting replacing the white oaks with red maples, and trying to arrange the trees so that most of the 10-foot is free, but I understand he's the landscape architect, and he'll make screening out of it, so that it looks like landscaping, but it's screening with a little design, and take the monument sign out.
Yeah, that's fine with me. Anyone else have anything? If not, we'll move on to number 8, Planning Commissioners Report. Madam Chair.
I have nothing.
Barb,
I have nothing.
nothing?
Nothing.
Okay, nothing from me. Janet, anything from you?
Are we doing council report too? I can wait till our council meeting to give it.
Okay. Then, on to number 9, Associate Planners Report.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Before the associate planner starts the, the in-service. I have one quick question that came up today that I would like to ask. I'm just going to make the diagram if I can a little bigger. The diagram that you see on the screen, and I don't have handouts today, but this is just a question. This is Bear Homes, and Bear Homes and they're as built as far as their parking lot, their building, and such. And if you see this red box here, this is something that's new, and then their trash enclosure is right next to it. They are requesting a 10 by 20. I won't say shed because it's the same building materials as the building. It's going to look the same. They want to store their snow blowers and their rakes and landscaping stuff in this building because they don't have any room in the building. And so they asked me whether or not it would be okay to build. And here we go again. This is the minor amendments that just like we did for Westmore, and I told everyone that I would bring it to you. This is what I would call minor, and as long as they meet the intent, meaning the building exterior, and it matches, I generally don't have issues when it's in the parking lot next to the dumpster and it's going to look the same. But it is an expansion, and this one is going to be 200 square feet. And it's basically a shed. So.
But it'll be made out of the concrete panels or whatever.
It will be the same material, the same materials. So it will match the dumpster enclosure. And I'm not sure what the dumpster, I'm sure it's some sort of block. I don't think they did a panel, but he said it would match the dumpster enclosure.
I have no problem with that. Anybody else?
No.
No, I have no problem.
All right.
All right. Now you're up.
I thought you were going to say he wants to build his new building right next door.
You know, I'm just trying to convince him that he wants that extra 100,000 square feet, but he's not quite ready.
All right. All right, Frank, back to you.
All right, so you should have a copy of my in-service presentation. And Elizabeth, if you'd be able to jump on the L drive. Because tonight we're going to be, I'll do a presentation on environmental review. I think this is a good starting point for understanding environmental regulations. And one thing I want to point out right away is I'll be talking about a lot of this in the context of private development. However, environmental review is not limited to private development. I personally am actually a little bit more familiar with environmental impact statements for big transportation projects like light rail lines or highway projects than I really have had experience with private land use development. And I'll start off by going through some acronyms and environmental assessment worksheet, environmental impact statement, and alternative urban area-wide review. I'll go into greater detail with those in the next slide. LGU, the local government unit, so that's a city, township, or county during the environmental review process. Columbus would act as an LGU for projects within the city. The RGU is the responsible government unit, and that's the assigned government unit with the most permitting authority. This is the body which ultimately makes the decision on environmental review, and I'll go into a little bit more detail later. And EQB, Environmental Quality Board, among other things, ensures compliance with state environmental policy and oversees the environmental review process. MEPA, the Minnesota Environmental Policy Act in 1973, that was passed only a few years after the National Environmental Policy Act of 1969. The MEPA is the act that created the Environmental Quality Board and created the foundation for environmental review in the state. And two terms I wanted to point out. First is connected action. A connected action in the context of environmental review is considered A project's considered connected if one induces the other, one is a prerequisite for the other, and the prerequisite is not justified by itself, or neither project is justified by itself. Phased action, that's two or more projects to be undertaken by the same proposer that an RGU determines will have environmental effects on the same geographic area and are unlikely to be undertaken are likely to be undertaken in phases over a short period of time. So I'll move on to the next slide so I can compare the three environmental review processes. First, environmental assessment worksheet. It's a document designed to review the potential environmental impacts of a proposed project. It's triggered in various ways, including 250 unattached units or 350 attached units in cities in the 7-county metro that has adopted a comprehensive plan with the appropriate elements in a fourth-class city. So a fourth-class city, those are cities with less than 10,000 inhabitants, and the threshold is lower if a project is not consistent with a comprehensive plan. Another way is warehousing or light industrial facility over 300,000 square feet of gross floor space in a fourth-class city. Additionally, other industrial, commercial, institutional facility over 200,000 square feet of gross floor space in a fourth-class city. And another trigger is a discretionary review can occur by a citizen's petition, which needs at least 100 signatures to be considered complete. However, the RGU ultimately has complete discretion whether an environmental assessment worksheet is merited, regardless of how many signatures are required. So it can deny a petition with more than 100 signatures if it is without merit. The petition process is only available for an environmental assessment worksheet. Just to be clear on that point. There is also discretionary review if it is determined that the project will have significant environmental impact by the RGU, or the responsible government unit, even if it does not meet the established thresholds or a petition has less than 100 signatures. And an appeal of the responsible government unit's decision on a petition would go to district court, not the Environmental Quality Board. Now, components of the environmental assessment worksheet, that's 20 questions regarding environmental impact, of a little bit more than 20 questions regarding environmental impact of a project. And the process is about a 6-month process, includes a public comment period and an option for the responsible government unit to host a public meeting. The responsible government unit must make a decision whether there is a need for an environmental impact statement. And something to note at the local level is that the 60-day rule to review an application is suspended during an environmental review. So if an application comes in and it is determined by thresholds or a petition that an EAW is required, the clock kind of stops, so to speak, and it does not resume until after the decision is made on the environmental assessment worksheet. So moving on to environmental impact statement, this is meant to be a more analytic about the significant impacts on the environment rather than an encyclopedic review of the project. And this is triggered in various ways. I think I'll just go through the ones I think apply to Columbus most, as I did with the EAW. 1,000 unattached or 1,500 attached units in cities in the 7-county metro that have adopted a comprehensive plan with the appropriate elements. Again, the threshold is lower if the project is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. Warehouse or light industrial facility of 750,000 feet of gross floor space in a fourth-class city. Other commercial, industrial, or institutional facilities over 500,000 gross floor space in a fourth-class city. It can be done voluntarily, and it could also be the result of an RGU making a positive environmental impact statement need decision after completing a EAW, as I discussed a little bit earlier. So some components of this include a project description, a list of all known government permits and approvals that are required, and it must discuss alternatives to the proposed action and the impacts of those alternatives. This can include alternate sites, alternative technologies, modified designs or layouts, modified scale or magnitude. It also has to include environmental, economic, employment, and sociological impacts of the project, and it must also include potential mitigation efforts of the environmental impacts. And this process is a 1-year plus process, and it begins with the scoping process in which potentially significant issues are identified related to the project before the preparation of an EIS. This is kind of meant to make it not as long as it possibly needs to be. There's a public scoping meeting, and then the responsible government unit will then issue a final decision regarding the scope of the EIS. So the environmental impact statement preparation notice is published, and the responsible government unit has 280 days from the notice to make a environmental impact statement adequacy determination. Now, the environmental impact statement is then prepared by conducting studies and writing the document. The environmental impact statement is then distributed, reviewed, and publicly commented on. Responses to the comments are added to the document and adjust the original draft as deemed necessary. The responsible government unit either determines the environmental impact statement is adequate and distributes a notice of adequacy, or it's deemed inadequate and a new draft is written, or the existing draft is edited. So AUAR, that's an alternative area-wide, alternative urban area-wide review. This is a choice sometimes used by RGUs that's a hybrid of an environmental assessment worksheet and an environmental impact statement process. The intention is to create a document which will assess the total impacts of anticipated development scenarios within a geographic area. It can be used to perform environmental analysis in advance of major development, and it can be used to guide local planning and zoning decisions. The AUAR document uses questions adapted from the environmental assessment worksheet form, but provides a deeper level of analysis that is more comparable to an environmental impact statement. The AUAR must be aligned with the comprehensive plan or future comprehensive plan, and these can be done in a minimum and maximum build-out scenarios. I've included some links on the last couple slides that provide more context and go into depth of the process. However, one thing I would suggest if you're kind of want to go a little deeper is finding, a nearby project that seems like it's interesting and just kind of looking over one of these types of documents to really get an idea of how these documents look in their final version. But I'll be happy to take any questions regarding environmental review now if anyone has any.
Anyone have any questions?
What's a fourth-class city?
Oh, I'm sorry, I might have went through that a little bit fast. I'm not trying to say Columbus is fourth class. It's a term used to differentiate the cities by population, and it's important in this case because our thresholds would be different if we were over 10,000 inhabitants.
So what is Columbus? Is Columbus a fourth-class city?
Yes, because it's less than 10,000. So yeah, I kind of kept everything in the context of things that I think would apply most to Columbus. There's a very, very long list of different triggers for this, but unless you're thinking of putting in a nuclear power plant, I think it was probably better that I skipped that one.
Anybody else?
This might be a stupid question.
Huh?
This might be a stupid question, but like environmental, meaning the environment as far as like traffic and the roads and like things in the environment around, like the set, or like environmental, like environmentalist, environmental. Like she's nodding. Like, is this like how is this going to affect the ozone layer and that type of environmentalism?
Yeah, and I mean, like transportation, that's also an aspect too, like kind of I would say really kind of both to that, because just kind of the environment around, like I said, with the EIS, the environmental, economic, employment, sociological impacts of the project are a component of this process. So, but Dean, you've done a few more of these than I have, and by which I mean I've done none. So maybe you could go into a little bit more detail on that.
It's a great question. First of all, air quality, water quality, noise, they're all included in this. But none of the reviews are going to address issues if your perspective, not you personally, but a person wanted to use this process as a means of resolving climate change. It doesn't go there.
Right.
Okay, so it's not that broad. This is a tremendous amount of information. If you read these rules or go into the statutes, it can be confusing. The Citizens Guide reference in here, these all help give you a perspective. I have been project manager on a dozen EAWs, a half a dozen AUARs, and one EIS. And part of the reason the AUAR concept was promoted by city planners is really to avoid a far more complicated environmental review, whether it's an EAW or an EIS, repetitively. And this notion of phased and connected actions, somehow people drag down the timing of a project because, well, you knew that that was going to happen when you approved the first one. Therefore, they're related, and you have to evaluate the scope of everything. So by nature, the AUAR takes a very large area. And the most recent one that I was involved with included the University of Minnesota property in Dakota County, which included the city of Rosemount, Empire Township, 2,800 acres. And evaluated in that process was mining activity, commercial development, residential development. It was a mixed bag. And we had minimum scenarios that reflected, okay, we're gonna keep this more of a rural area and not too urban. And the next scale was a lot more housing units and things of that nature. And so you have a great realm in which you are anticipating and you are describing what the potential impacts may be. And that includes transportation, all the water quality, air quality, noise, all of these different elements. And as Frank mentioned, part of these you have to do within the scope of, in the 7-county area, an approved comprehensive plan. Well, when you're doing a minimum, maximum scenario, and sometimes communities do 3 different scenarios, one of them is likely to be inconsistent with your plan. So typically the minimum scenario is what your existing comp plan is. And then you elevate that to evaluate a conflict much greater, maybe double the potential impact. But again, the purpose of this, when you have completed the AUAR process, no individual project that comes in, and in our 4th class city, as an example, you had a 750,000 square foot warehouse proposed, you wouldn't do an EIS, even though it exceeds the threshold, because you can't duplicate environmental review. Once it's done, it's done. So it was planners, honestly, and some developers that felt this area-wide approach to analyzing conflicts was the easiest to do. And we haven't really connected this to what's happening specifically within your community. And the reason for Frank to do this topic is that Lino Lakes and Columbus are going to be involved in a joint AUAR. We haven't got the paperwork initiated that through a joint power agreement describes who's in charge of what, but it is likely to be Lino Lakes in charge of the project and we're a participant, we could demand to be our own RGU, be in charge of this, but then you're duplicating all the public notices, all the comments individually from the two communities. For the property that's in Lino Lakes, 300 acres south of us?
300 acres, so it's from County Road 14 all the way up through Columbus, and it's, I want to say it's 60 acres in Columbus. Or maybe it's 30 acres in Columbus.
I think it's 60 gross, and it's
And
the
it might-
Rabine.
It's the Rabine property that they're looking on, but the much greater part is in Lino Lakes. But it's, I believe it's 210 acres total.
You said it's on County Road 14?
It goes from County Road 14 north, so it's from 80th Street, I believe, to, and it's all the Rabine properties. And it's not in Washington County, it's all in Lino Lakes property. I don't have a map of the project area, but
So if you go down Hornsby Street,
So that's, I thought it was over by
Yep.
Hornsby
then
and,
you take the left on whatever that is, and then take the right and keep going south.
it's on the, it's on,
past Tom's place?
Tom's is a part of it, I
Tom's
believe.
is on Lyons.
Yep, so it's his property and
Yep.
everything south.
so this is in Columbus, it's these properties, the south properties, and then in Lino, it's all of Rabine property up to 80th Street. So it's not everyone's property, it's just the Rabine property that's in Lino, but it's large acreage. I mean, there's a lot of acres in it.
And for part of that same property, it may be smaller, it may be a little larger. Lino Lakes already completed an AUAR. It was done for commercial industrial purposes, but we haven't seen the document. I don't know what the different scenarios may have been. By law, when you do an AUAR, you have to update it every 5 years to keep it valid. And that would reflect if you changed your comprehensive plan, whatever reason. You send out statements to all the original review authorities, and you say all the assumptions are the same. Or we've changed this parcel to whatever, we don't think it affects the outcome of this. Any of the review agencies that are entitled to receive copies of either an EAW, an EIS, or an AUAR respond. And often you will get nasty comments from Pollution Control Agency or the DNR. If you meddle with, like our little development that got too close to the shoreline of the lake, they're hostile in these processes. When I started my involvement in the environmental review process in the 80s, you would approach these agencies and ask them for assistance in even preparing the documents. Now, they don't talk to you before, but when you're done, man, they give it to you. And so there's a lot of coordination from professionals who do this. When I say I managed a project, I was responsible for the hiring of consultants who are air quality, water quality, transportation, whatever level of experts. And sometimes you can find a multidisciplinary firm that has experts in all those categories, and it's one consultant that's doing this. But in many instances, you're hiring multiple companies to assist in this process. And then the agencies make comment. And the rules are you must respond to those comments. If they don't like those comments, they have an opportunity to come back. There's ultimately kind of an end date, but the preparers of the information here, as well as the review agencies, really have a keen understanding of what the other's doing. And it's a push and pull process, but you're talking professionals who generally speak the same language. And so on an air quality issue, you're going to have a high-powered consultant conferring with pollution control about whatever issues they're doing. When you read in the paper the conflicts of these mining proposals up near Ely, one is outside of the watershed of the boundary waters, the second one is in. It's gotten so convoluted and so political, and depending on which presidential administration is in power, leases are available, next time they're not available. That process has lingered on for 6 years now. And as Frank mentioned, you're supposed to get this done, once you finish your scoping process on an EIS, you're supposed to get it done in 270 days. This has been going on 5 years up there, and it's just rancor, back and forth, pounding heads. And of course, the industry and the locals up there want the jobs, and the environmentalists, mostly from the Twin Cities, are pushing. So this, it will tell you in all the rules, is not to be used as a permit tool. In other words, this isn't meant to stop any project, but it does all the time. And it's only because it's political. So this is a huge amount of information, and even if you don't have a question now, as we approach projects, you just got to ask for a refresher in this, and use these resources. I mean, the reference guide, even the draft EAW form, there's not that many questions, 20 or so. You can read down and it'll give you an idea what it was. I can tell you, going back in time in Columbus, we had one potential mandatory project actually for an EIS, and that was Burgeon's, but they have an agricultural exemption. They dramatically exceeded 750,000 feet of warehouse or other commercial space. They've got 1 million square feet of space under roof. But as an agricultural entity, they have an exemption. Correct me, Elizabeth, on the racetrack, they agreed to do a discretionary EAW because none of the actual thresholds were met. They had a 50,000 racetrack building, the casino, if you will, and the restaurant, and then they had barns that didn't total 50,000 feet. And so it didn't meet a building threshold. It came close on the parking threshold. But because there were a couple of different categories, it wasn't met. But when they came in, they simply said, we don't want to get halfway through the permit process and then get dragged into doing an environmental review. So they went the discretionary route, or excuse me, that's technically a voluntary. They chose to do one, which a lot of people do with an EIS if they're close to the threshold. The proposer just says, we're going to do this. And so there is no discretionary approach. There's no petition outside of an EAW when you're doing an AUAR. It is strictly a developer comes in, approaches the city, you talk about it, and they go, you know, we could be building 1 million square feet of commercial warehouse space in your community. That's an EIS. That'll take years. And if we don't address the whole project up front, that's where phased action applies. Same at landowner. It took them 10 years to get up to the 1 million square feet threshold. They're 90% done with the project, and technically now they have to do an EIS because the 10th phase exceeded the threshold. So up front, when somebody approaches the community, if we looked at the ownership map and saw Rabine owned a bunch of property in Washington County, we would say, you know, there's potential phased or connected action here. You've got to address that. And that dictates what the scope of a particular project is. It's very complicating. It's very informing. When you get petitions for something, it's usually because people just don't want whatever it is, you know, an apartment project or some church that they don't prescribe to comes in the community and they ask you to do an EAW. And if they have more than 100, that doesn't mean you're doing an EAW. That just means they had a complete application and you say there's no merit. They're not close to the thresholds, and you as a city would make that decision. Similarly, the rules say you need 100 people signing a petition for it to be, quote, complete. They come in with 60, and they convince you that this has the potential for some impact. You could order a discretionary EAW, even though they didn't meet the technicalities of the petition process. But most residents, I hate to say, abuse the whole purpose of this and try to scuttle a project because they don't like it, and it has nothing to do with environmental review. So with that, I'll quit.
Or they have real concerns about the environmental review, speaking as somebody who was behind an EAW request a few years back. Right, Barb?
I bet Barb was fiery about that.
She's scary.
All right. Frank, anything else from you?
No, Mr. Mayor, that is all from me tonight.
Well, that was quite a bit. Holy smokes. So, does that mean we're going to get that whole street blacktopped eventually?
Yes, we would love to have that whole street eventually
If
blacktop.
this goes through in Lino, it'll be one of the escape routes, right?
Yes.
And would that also encourage them to put on and off ramps on 35E right there, or not?
You know, I think that will come out of the AUAR and some environmental, reviews with traffic, because they have to make their case to FHWA to see if they could meet some criteria in order to get another exit and/or exit on-ramp and exit.
But did I hear you say that that Lino's already done the AUAR
No, Lino's not doing it. It's the
development?
vendor. So there's a vendor or a development company that has approached both Columbus and Lino Lake saying, we have a property owner who wants to sell their property. They want to sell it all at once. They don't want to piecemeal it. And we want to do an AUAR first to see what the environmental issues are. And in this particular case, it's really about public utilities, traffic. As far as the zoning, Lino and Columbus are similar. We both have a light industrial land use in our comp plan. And so that's what they're proposing. So there's no conflict in use. And they feel that because this would be a phased development, that the AUAR is the best route to go. Since majority of the project is in Lino, they've indicated that they would take the lead in as far as doing notices and public meetings and such, but we would have a joint powers agreement saying that Columbus would be involved and we would have a seat at the table and we would be able to do comments, but we wouldn't do redundant services. Because technically, if they wanted to, they would make an application to Columbus, they would make an application to Lino. We would each have a parallel system. We would get the same comments. We would both have to do the same thing, which would be very costly to do.
But this is just the environmental part of it.
Yep.
For the building part, they will have to do separate cities, correct?
Yes, they will.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else? You want to make the motion?
I will. I'll make the motion to adjourn the meeting.
Is there a second?
I don't want it to end.
Nobody else wants to go
This is
home.
I
Bethany, I'll
second
second.
We still have a half hour before the mosquitoes come out. It's moved and seconded. I'll call for the vote.
Lynn, aye.
Janet, I.
Bethany, aye.
Sue, I.
And Jesse, aye. Our meeting is adjourned at 5 to 8.